Hello, good evening, and welcome back. So we have two aspects of the coronavirus developments. One being how businesses and people are restricted from their freedom, and then the other side of how the government is responding to it, basically after their sweeping legislation and what they're thinking about it now. So, to start, a pub has closed, of course. I mean, we know that pubs are supposed to close anyway, but with anything like this, of course, individuals try to create a way to get around limitations. Obviously, that's the entrepreneurial spirit anyway, that you find a problem of which people have and you think of how you can develop a cure or a solution to the problem that people have, and then they pay you for your intellect and your capability to provide them a service of which they find valuable. That is essentially the essence of entrepreneurship. So, firstly here, the coronavirus Nottinghamshire Lock-in pub closed under new laws. So, what was this pub doing? They had their regulars, so they had a lock-in. So, basically, the people from the same group, the same little get-together, the same, you could call household, essentially, given that these are people that spend time together every day and with each other every day and socialise every day, and have an extended family, not by bloodline, but through relationship instead. I understand blood is thicker than water, as the saying goes, but these are their relationships of which they would have brothers in arms, to use the military reference, for example, of which they would think of their friends as family, of which they would think of their social support network group as vital for the continuity of their own morale, and by extension their life as well, as we see that people with better support groups seem to function better. Obviously, we've seen the deterioration of men's social groups by banning men-only spaces and anything that would be beneficial for men to have as that time together. That's been thrown under the bus for quite a while. But as we see here, it's now extrapolated out from just places where it's men only, which is illegal, of course, to places where men seem to congregate anyway, and that's being shut down through the coronavirus. And for those who want to get particularly black-pilled, they would think, well, okay, so globalism has clearly failed and there is nationalist resentment growing, and therefore if people join together, there is thought that they could be dissident and the government would want to crack down on that. And what better guise to use in order to stop people congregating together and perhaps talking about how they're not happy with the government and developing their ideas with community cohesion than to ban gatherings of two or more people, unless they're from the same household. But of course they define household as people who live together, as most of us would understand household to be, yes, of course. But does this really require 3 police cars and a police van? I strongly suggest no. It's basically just people trying to struggle through the drudge, the monotony, the difficulty together, to pull together for community cohesion, that wartime spirit, as Boris Johnson would say. But no, of course not. And the response from Ashfield District Council has said that obviously they're thoughtless and they're spreading the virus to everybody by just being with each other and nobody else, thinking that the rules do not apply to them. But that comes into why rules are there in the first place. The rules essentially are saying, okay, so what are people doing? What works? How can we define this in a concise manner to make it easy to follow so people actually know what they're doing? Well, that's where rules come from. That's where the 10 Commandments came from, for example. And so if you know why the rules are put in place, then you can break the laws, or the rules, essentially, because it's done in the spirit of the rules and not to the letter of the rule. And that's why these people are joining together themselves. Whether or not you think there should ever be an exception for breaking the law, if you think that the law is always correct and no exception should be justified, and if so, then definitely don't look into jury nullification, then fair enough, they did something wrong. Next, we have from the business perspective of a vape shop owner, somebody saying, well, okay, it's an essential item. I mean, the government has been unable to actually define what an essential item is. Obviously, we've seen a crackdown on selling Easter eggs because they're not essential items. It's okay, well, if you go shopping for essential items and there are so-called non-essential items there, still, we don't know what either of these really mean. If they are available for purchase and the stocks are there and they're on the shelves, then why not purchase them? You could say, well, then don't restock the shelves. It's like, okay, that's fine, but what's wrong with shifting the stock that we already have? Why is that so bad? And if you're concerned about rationing, then maybe using a non-essential good can make up for the lack of essential goods we're allowed to have. So, as this gentleman mentions in terms of DIY, you're allowed to buy nails, and are they essential goods then, compared to nicotine and tobacco alternatives, things which would mean that you aren't using cigarettes and tobacco, and you're not consuming the tar, which surely would put a greater strain on the NHS, which we don't want to do, especially at a time like this, especially anything which is respiratory related, that you don't permit people to buy vaping products, which are, by all accounts, a safer alternative to smoking, in which case, yes, this gentleman who was trying to acknowledge the social distancing rules, so he thought, well, I'm helping out people, I am offering an essential good, I only have one worker in the shop at any one time, I only allow one customer in at any one time, we disinfect the surfaces between every customer visit, I think we're doing everything right. But then the police say no, and then there was an argument because the police don't know what they're arresting this man, as in the grounds on what they're arresting him for, according to him at least. Then they take him to a cell for a couple of hours, and the police at the station, by all accounts, are very friendly. It's just the ones that are sent out. They don't know what he's supposed to be jailed for. They've got burglary, stealing, shopkeeping, or mugging, burglary, and shopkeeper, according to himself, of course, at which he was let out because, yes, this is, again, just ridiculous. And then for the individuals, of course, we have the York woman who has been fined for breaching coronavirus rules, trying to get on a train. Oh no, you can't be doing that. I know train tickets are getting expensive, but £660? That's quite a lot. As well as the victim surcharge of £66 and cost of £85, of course, because she didn't want to have to, well, essentially she was pleading the fifth. She didn't want to have to mention who she was or where she was going, because that's a personal matter. But no one under this legislation, of course not. Who you are should be available to the government and the wider public and any police, and where you're going as well, and also your intention. That the police should have the right to know every little thing about what's happening, and no notion of your privacy should be left. So yes, if you're trying to get on a train, then no. And we know that in France and Italy, you need a letter in order to go out, and you're restricted for how far you can go. In Britain, we don't have such letters. However, we are basically going that way. For example, receiving letters if you are a key worker, in order to then say, well, yes, I am allowed out. What is referred to as essential in terms of exercise or picking up medical supplies, and then, of course, this public transport isn't permitted, in which case, we're seeing more drivers driving their cars. That can't be good. So what if they're going out to the countryside? And as we've seen the drones, that apparently no, the countryside isn't good, even though, of course, people are much further apart than the 2 meters required, and further apart than they would be if they were cooped up in a city. So as far as social distancing is concerned, as far as health is concerned for fighting the coronavirus, then clearly being in the countryside is a much better idea. So, last but not least, how are they responding? Well, Boris Johnson vows more virus tests as UK deaths exceed 2,000. So basically, of course, they're saying, well, hey, what we're doing is working. Yes, the deaths are increasing, and it doesn't seem like we're having an effect, but we're definitely having an effect. And anything bad that happens means it's just a delayed effect, and anything good that happens, it means what we're doing is working. So, hey, when we slowly release the controls we have on you, with our reviews every 3 weeks, we have no intention of giving you the amount of limited freedom you had before, but instead we'll slowly ease up until a point there is no longer significant pushback, in which case we will then stop there. So you will not get as much freedom as you did before, but we will stop at a point at which we think it is acceptable. And that will have to allow gatherings of more than 2 people, in which case nationalist organisations can get underway again and hopefully close the borders and put in some more immigration controls in order to stop such globalist intent spreading around again, which caused this problem in the first place, that same regulation to prohibit the businesses within a country, which causes them to outsource out to places like China, of course. Hopefully we can prevent that, and then with that uprising, hopefully create a bit more freedom in the years to come. So all hope is not lost, but it's not looking so good at the moment. So yes, he's saying that testing was massively increasing, and it was the way through the pandemic, yes, to see if people have the virus, and then also to see if they have had the virus. Once we reach that level of herd immunity, of course, then the older people can be safe. The older people, of course, who just have a few months left to live anyway, by all accounts, or by the scientific consensus as is popular, then if they do die from the coronavirus a few months before they would have died of something else, cancer, coronary heart disease, they're the main two, then obviously it's sad, and it's a funeral for the family, and it is a loss, no doubt about it. But is this really concerns about coronavirus being such a deadly killer? No, it's definitely not. Are we overreacting a bit? It does definitely seem so. Is the death rate that bad? Doesn't seem so. Not for the younger people, the healthier people, the people who would actually be affecting the economy. But I think infrastructure is a better word to use than economy. Because, sure, you might think economy is just words, or just numbers on a screen. But when you mention infrastructure, and it's down to whether or not you can have clean drinking water, then yes, it is quite important. Because, sure, you might think, I don't need to stock up on water because the coronavirus doesn't affect the water supply. That's not a problem. So, yes, you're correct. Except, because of the government reaction to this, if people are laid off who are responsible for keeping your water clean, and they no longer work, and therefore there was nobody responsible for keeping your water clean, and you're not getting water anymore, then, yeah, it seems like having water is quite a good idea, because, hey, it seems like catastrophe happens, and government just can't help meddling to make things worse, as we're seeing. Let's ignore the climate talks, because, hey, we've already cut down on such fossil fuels and emissions, so we can definitely delay that and instead be concerned about the individuals. So we're looking for hundreds of thousands of tests promised, seeing as the NHS employs 1.2 million, and at the moment 3,500 NHS frontline staff in England and Wales have been tested for the virus since the outbreak began, which is ridiculously small compared to the 25,000 they wish to test per day. On top of this, of course, this is the difference between the public and private sector, whereas in the UK we're struggling to get resources together. Countries like Italy are having to import tests from China, of which 80% of the results are wrong. So they've only got 20% reliability, so they're basically useless. Some would say they need higher than 95% accuracy, so the P is less than 5%, or 1 in 20, or 0.05, however you wish to say that. That is normally the acceptable acceptable possibility that the results happen by chance. P-value of less than 0.05. So when it's 0.8, then there's clearly a huge problem. This isn't acceptable. And of course, Trump's not accepting masks from China. Saying, oh, that's so bad, especially after you shutting off flights. It's like, okay, shutting off flights actually a bloody good idea, and not just xenophobic. And then the masks turns out to already be infected by coronavirus. So either China is absolutely awful at producing things because it is causing more harm than good for the countries that buy their products, or they're willingly infecting and harming other countries. So either one, either they're incompetent or they're malicious. I don't see a third option. Either way, you can't trust them to help you out. So the private sector, of course, has offered up its support, both in the UK, hence we've had UCL and Mercedes Formula One creating their ventilators, and in America, the tests for the coronavirus have finally passed CDC regulations, and they've lifted them to allow it to happen, of which they've got a test so that you would know within 15 minutes if you have the coronavirus. Not to be outdone, then another company said, what about 2 minutes? Yes. Try and be 2 minutes to know if you've got the coronavirus, then. Yes, that's bloody good going. And then the same goes for, we need like 1 million masks a day in order to supply the NHS because they're disposable, at which point, again, private sector in America again, comes out and says, yep, well, how about we disinfect those masks and then we can reuse them? So that's a stupid idea. Yeah, but we're doing it now, building up to about 60, 80,000 a day. So then we can use the same over in the UK. Obviously, the US has been pioneering its medical innovation for the world for quite a while now because it's got that private investment and they're able to take those risks that other countries won't if they're nationalised. And yes, of course, you've got collective bargaining with things like the NHS, but then you still haven't got that risk-taking and the investment of which enables new medicine to be developed like they do in the US. So they are supplying the new technology for the rest of the world, essentially. That's the same as goes for NATO, at which point they are providing global defense against countries like China, essentially. So they're predominantly protecting Japan against the 9-dash line in the South China Sea at the moment, as far as NATO is concerned. But yes, the response basically from the government hasn't been, oh, well, things don't seem to be getting any better, and we're restricting movement for people and limiting their freedom, not allowing them to make any money. The economy is struggling and therefore the infrastructure will also struggle. Instead, it's just, well, we need more tests. It's like, well, you better get a fucking move on then and allow people to do their jobs. And if you tell the private market that, or private enterprise, that they can't be open because they can't be trusted to keep their customers disinfected, then of course they have a vested interest in finding out which possible clients have the virus and which have been cleared in order to get that herd immunity up and to actually find out what the mortality rate is, if it is so severe or if it isn't, as France did a test on the 19th of March, but the results still aren't public, it seems. So yes, they have a vested interest in order to help people out, because if they don't have living customers, then they don't have any customers at all, in which case they will go down anyway. So if you're saying that they don't have a choice to stay open, then they're going to try and persuade you otherwise as soon as possible, hence they would like to be able to make that happen. But if you keep the regulations in place so that they can't express their innovation, then you're only going to make things worse. But that seems to be what government is good at anyway, because it doesn't create wealth, of course, it just takes it from somebody and gives it to somebody else, which it thinks is a better way to spend the money instead of people who are deciding themselves. So go explain the morality of that. But in conclusion, people's freedoms are visibly being suppressed, both for communities coming together, businesses being open, and people trying to go about their own business. And the government response is, hey, more control and nationalisation clearly works, even though we're harming people and not being able to provide enough support. So, well done. Hopefully, recognition of the free market will be appreciated soon, and we can get back to a more free way of living than before the coronavirus, where the law is applied to everybody equally, and at that point, we might actually have a happier society. But until then, and until next time, have a good one.